Hey, hi, and welcome back to the Southern Millennial Mom podcast. I am Samantha May, and I am your official Southern Millennial Mom. To all of my returning listeners, thank you once again for coming back and listening to me ramble, rant, and reminisce, I guess. To all of the new listeners, welcome. You missed a few, that's fine. But go listen to episode 1, or you can stay and listen to this particular episode. I do highly encourage that you go listen to episode 1 so that you can get to know me, your host, so much better. You learn a lot in episode 1, and you learn even more from starting from the beginning. I am still new at this whole podcasting thing, learning the auditory steps, learning the editing things. If there's anything that I need to know, that I need to fix, you will find out how to inform me of this at the end of each episode. Episode 10, the last episode, was me and my husband having time to sit down and record and talk about how we met, how we became a couple, some of the things that went on at our wedding, not a whole lot of things. You learn our dynamic in that episode. So go check it out if you ever wondered how we met and how I won the golden ticket in husbands and friends and forever partners. Well, at least until death do us part, of course. But go check out that episode. Today, I have a very special guest. She is my friend. We have been friends for almost 10 years.
A lot of years.
Like, I have some stuff. Like, I'll have pictures of us way back when. I'm like, Boo was... I feel like, though, no.
Was she younger?
She was younger because you were introduced to her 2 dojos ago.
Oh, you're right.
Yes, when our mutual friend Tina
Yep, you're
introduced
right.
us.
You're right. I forgot.
Yes. Anyways, my friend Kait Nolan, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself? What's your profession? What a few of your interests?
Okay. Well, I am a romance author, actually. That is my occupation. Also a recovering academic. I spent 15 years working as a research psychologist at a major university before I left to do this full time. And
you're also a black belt in Taekwondo.
Oh, yeah, there's that. That's the whole reason we know each other.
Yes. I'm going to be completely honest. I have not read any of your books.
I'm not offended by that.
I'm one of those people, if I read, like if somebody writes a book or they're a musician of something, I feel like I need to judge them harshly. I want to give constructive criticism, but I feel like it would come off as harsh. And I did start reading your one and only, I think it's your only fantasy book that you wrote.
Oh, I started in paranormal romance, and then back in the very early days of self-publishing, and ended up landing an agent that way, and spent a couple years pursuing New York before deciding that was not for me. And was so burnt out, I couldn't keep writing paranormal romance. So the series that I had started, I was never going to finish, and I got really tired of having to tell readers who were emailing me, hey, when is so-and-so's book coming out? Never. So I unpublished all, but I think I have one random standalone YA that I wrote on a whim.
Yeah.
Back when YA was really kicking off as a genre.
I had the dream when I was younger, I'm going to write a book, and I have all these stories in my head. It's me actually getting it out on, we'll say, paper. Mm-hmm. That is difficult because I am too detailed when it comes to things. Like if I'm talking to you and will say, oh, well, this person said this, but they were doing it in this way, and blah, 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 blah.
That just tells me you're high context.
I am. I notice everything, but it's so funny. I hate when authors are so detailed. I don't care what the room looks like a lot of the times. I want to know what the characters are doing. If the way the room looks has context and how the story is going, yes, I need to know.
This is why I don't read most fantasy, because it is this endless. Most fantasy novels are these big doorstop books, and you could easily cut 200 pages of unnecessary description that does not actually move the plot forward, which is why I don't write fantasy.
Which is I love that is mostly a lot of the style that I read, but occasionally I have to do a cleanse of it, and I will do like just contemporary romance. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I told you this, but I know I put it on my TikTok, and I think I put it on my Facebook, but it was year before last, I'll say, when one of my brothers was getting married. It was the destination wedding, and one of my mother-in-law's friends happened to be in the area, so she came and visited us at the beach house that we were renting, and we're all sitting at the table, and she's talking, and she turns to me and goes, so what do you like to do as a hobby? I'm like, I like to read. Oh, what do you read? I like to read romance. Romance. Oh, I had to stop reading romance at college. It kept getting me into trouble. Nobody can see her face, but she's giving the same look I probably gave this woman. Like, how did reading romance get you in trouble?
What people usually mean in that context when they are demeaning the genre is that, oh, how dare we have a genre that is written predominantly by women for women that actually gives them the expectation that their partner should put them first.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah. Like, I don't that is the majority of what I consume is those kind of books. A lot of people are like, oh, it's just about the sex.
No.
It's about how, a man is supposed to treat his woman, or how she wants them to treat her. And it's like, some men who are like, I don't know what's wrong, I keep getting dumped. Read a romance novel. Mm-hmm. Read a good romance novel. Not ACOTAR, though.
No.
Not ACOTAR. It's a great series. I have all the books. I bought them for myself. They are sitting on my shelf, and I need to... It's one of the few series that I want to physically read. Mm-hmm. Anyways, we have, as somebody I know likes to say, derailed a lot.
Which often happens when we talk books.
Yes. Let us get into the questions. When you were thinking about having kids, how many kids were you planning on having, like, in total? And when did you think that you were ready to start having them?
Well, from the beginning, so my husband and I are both only children. So from the beginning, I was like, 2 seems good. That's a good round number, because we both had kind of some of our own, because our issues being an only child. Mm-hmm. And so it's like 2 seems good, balanced. And like we got married at 23, and we had, well, he was on board with kind of whatever I wanted to do. We had wildly different experiences, like with our own parents. My mom was 33 when she had me. Mm-hmm. And his mom was considerably younger. She was 26. And at that point, I was still in graduate school when we got married. Well, actually, we got married before I started grad school. And, I mean, grad school for psychology is not short.
Yeah.
And the idea of juggling grad school and children was no.
Yeah.
So I had no intention of having, after I was 30, seemed great. Let's get my career established and all of that before I have to worry about losing sleep and juggling 875,000 other things.
Oh, yeah. Ryan and I actually had this conversation last night because we were listening to the podcast that we both listened to. He was like, well, do you think we would have turned out differently if we had had Boo later in life, because in the podcast they were reading an email from a guy that his reasoning for not wanting to have kids is because he wasn't financially stable.
Yeah, which is a solid reason.
With a lot of people, they say, "Oh, I'm not going to be financially stable," and it's because they don't want to cut back on the lifestyle that they have, which makes total sense. And Brian was like, "Well, what do you think if we didn't have Boo early on in life, because I had her less than 10 months after we got married."
She was clearly a honeymoon baby.
She was not a honeymoon
baby.
She was not a honeymoon baby. She was post-honeymoon.
Not by much.
Not much at all. But he's like, do you think we would have had more kids or had kids or somehow turned out different if we didn't have her so young or so quick? I'm like...
How old were you?
I was 23.
Yeah.
So, found out like the day before my birthday, the same year we got married, that I was pregnant. And I was like, honestly, I was like, no, we were going to wait. And Brian asked, do you think, if we hit our 30s, we would be ready? And I told him, if we would have waited till our 30s, I probably wouldn't have wanted to have kids, because I didn't want to have to be a parent so much older.
Mm-hmm. And that is a valid thing, because if you look biologically, we having children younger when we have more energy, it takes less of a toll.
Yes,
and so sociologically, as a culture, we are moving into this era and have been for the last couple of decades, because women are pursuing careers and so on and so forth. And so they're having kids later and later in life. And as somebody, once I hit 30, 35, suddenly I did not have the energy that I had when I was 25. And that would have been a big deal. And I've always been somebody who needs a lot of sleep. So I was never excited about the prospect of tiny human robbing me of that for many years. It was one of those, this is an expected part of having a baby, so we were going to do it if that was necessary, but I wasn't excited about it. Yeah. And that, because I was going to be an older mom, that was the original plan. Yeah. And it makes a big difference. And I know a lot of women a lot of my age bracket friends didn't have children until they were later for a multitude of reasons, PCOS and various and sundry other health conditions on top of career things and whatnot. And they have a lot of struggles. Yeah. Because they're tired. Yes. Because I think one of the big, frankly, lies that is told to us as women, it's like, oh, you can do everything. No, you can't. No. This is a reality. You are one person, and you have a limited amount of hours in the day and energy to spend. And some women want to spend that on family. Some women want to spend it on career, and somebody wants to spend it on a split of both of those things and other things. And you can only do so much. And even if you have a fully supportive partner who behaves as a legitimate partner and not this sort of hand-wavy kind of thing that a lot of guys seem to do when it comes to... Yeah,
they have to be asked to babysit their own kids.
Yeah, when... That's not a soapbox you want to get me on right this second. But, you unless you have one of those partners, and they are rare, because men they just don't. They haven't been socialized into doing those things. They aren't aware. Yeah. Then you can't do everything. Yeah. Because you just don't have that kind of bandwidth and energy. Oh, yeah. And that is, I think, one of the big frustrations that I've seen among a lot of women who did choose to have children, or maybe got pregnant, whether they were intending to or not. And, of course, they decided to keep their child, which is, and they love their kids, but there's definitely the what if.
Yeah. Ryan and I told him I wanted 4 kids when, we started dating and talking about that kind of thing. Really got serious about it. I wanted 4 kids, because I am one of, technically for myself, I am one of the 2 middle kids. I have an older half brother and an older half sister. And I don't think you've met him, but my younger brother.
I've met him once.
Yeah, much taller than I am. Yeah. This is totally unfair, and I see it all over the internet. If you see the short girl, she's the older sister. And that has been the case. And I've been trying to fight it mentally. But, you don't have that really middle child syndrome, which my older half sister ended up going and living with my grandfather. And it was my older brother, myself, and my younger brother. And I really felt that middle child thing. And with a lot of things I hear and see on the internet, with two kids, you have that competition between them. Like, the older ones expected to do better, and the younger ones expected to be exactly like the older one, even though they're technically more babied and their parents aren't nearly as strict on them. That was kind of the case for all of us. Moving on. We got sidetracked from the first question. When you and Ellen were talking about, the number of kids, I think maybe we answered this. What was, like, the number of years being married, not just due to your age, but being married that you wanted to start having kids?
I mean, that was for me really tied to grad school and when I would be finished. At that point, I was pursuing a PhD. So I was going to be nearly 30 by the time I finished all of that. So that was just sort of inherent in our life circumstances at that point. But even if I hadn't been on that particular life path, I still wouldn't have wanted kids before I was 30 because I felt very strongly that we needed to have plenty of time as an us. And to figure out, who we were as a couple, as a married couple, because, things change when you get married from when you're dating. And to really, it was important to me to have that financial stability. And particularly, we had the misfortune, because we got married at 23, and 1 week after we got back from our honeymoon, we found out we were both out of a job.
No, I don't think I heard that story.
So that ushered in a very swift end to the honeymoon period and several years of some financial struggle. So that became, something, it wasn't just a matter of lip service. Like, no, having a kid right now would be financially devastating.
Yeah.
And so that contributed a lot to my nope, we're not doing this until we're at least 30.
Okay. Okay. So this is one of those questions I don't know. About the topic that we talked about earlier. The funny question, when you were growing up, were your parents like, when they finally noticed you started liking boys and everything, did they say, don't have sex? Or...
My dad definitely never said a word, because this was a conversation that was, nope, we're not going to have that conversation. Talk to your mother kind of situation. And my mother, this was not something she was comfortable talking about. So they totally sent me to the sex education class at the church. That was awkward, as you might imagine. Yeah. And then when I got into teenage years where I was very intimidating to boys, so it really was not an issue. They were afraid of me. But Mom was at that point a bitter divorcee.
Oh, yeah.
And so I vividly remember her referring to sex as the bad thing, which was a lot of fun to unpack with my therapist. And she also kind of gave me a complex, after we got married, when we were struggling with all of the post not having a job and going through a string of terrible jobs, where every time she talked to me on the phone, she would talk about how terrible it would be if I got pregnant right then. And it gave me a complex.
Good God.
Yeah, I basically, we both waited. That was a choice that we made before we got married. And it was less out of a moral concern, that was there, but it was more out of, if I have sex, I'll get pregnant and ruin my life. That was the narrative that was running through the back of my brain. And that stuck with me for a long time after I got married.
Yeah. My mother she would always be, don't have sex. She was a teen mom at 17. She didn't graduate high school. Having a kid at a young age and not growing up in a very stable household. She would always tell us when we were little, don't have sex. And this is even before, hormones were hitting us, 7 and 8 year old. And I'd be like, I don't know what sex is.
I don't think it occurred to my mom that it would even be a thing until high school. I remember, so I was part of the era when Accutane first came out, like the acne medicine. Mm-hmm. And I had horrible acne in high school. And so when I was, I don't know, freshman or sophomore in high school, we went to the dermatologist and we'd gone through all of the other things. And they were like, okay, well, there's this new drug that's come out or whatever, but it has devastating birth defects if you get pregnant. Mm-hmm. And so I vividly remember sitting in the doctor's office and being asked if I was sexually active in front of my mother, who is this very prudish, like, we don't talk about this. And I remember looking at the doctor and be like, I mean, that would require at least having a date first. So no.
I feel like Boo is kind of the same way. She's very intimidating because she can handle the boys.
Yeah.
Like, she gets rough. But she can also hang out with the girls, too. Mm-hmm. She is comfortable enough in her skin. We've always had open conversations with her about things. And, you know, I am dreading the sex talk with her because I'm going to have it.
Yeah.
Because it is so important. And, you know, what I learned from, you know, reading romance novels. I'm like,
there are important lessons to be had in there, but that certainly should not be the sole source of sex education.
Boys are, you know, pressured into watching porn, and that is a complete misrepresentation. Mm-hmm. Okay, so next question. When you two were talking about kids, was there a gender that you wanted more than the other? Did you think would be easier? Because I think there's a kind of misconception because, like, oh, when boys get older, they start, you know, teenage boys stink and things like this. Girls are the exact same in my personal purview, because, you know, there are times I will walk into Boo's room and I'm like, wow, that's rank.
Hormones are a thing.
Yes.
I mean, you know, we were very much of the healthy kid, 10 fingers, 10 toes, that sort of deal. I think I personally kind of wanted a boy because, like, I was very tomboyish growing up. Mm-hmm. I did not know how to relate to girly girls, and so I sort of lived in karmic terror that I was going to end up with some pink Barbie-loving child that I would not know how to relate to. And I don't think Alan... he would have gone either way. But given the number of his... He had lots of, like, you know, dad fantasies of the throwing baseballs and that kind of thing.
Him as a girl dad, like him being
well, since that's what he ended up more or less being, there's that. But he definitely had the dad fantasy of the playing catch and you know, teaching baseball and all that jazz. We definitely couldn't agree on girl names.
Oh, really?
No, we had a list of like 6 that we were good with boys. We could not agree on girl names to save anything.
We did have a boy name picked out before we had Boo. And because we're not planning on having any more kids, I'm comfortable giving this information out. We were at his family's church anniversary or something like that. But they had a list of, like, basically the original founders of the church. And one of his great plus something grandfather's name was Leo Alexander. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that would be such a great name. And I could call him my little lamb, because Lam.
Which is just funny, given that Leo means lion.
Exactly. And did you ever see Boo's baby bed? I know you might have seen pictures.
I can't remember.
A friend of mine painted the mural on the back of it, and it was a lion and a lamb laying down together. And, like, I don't know the actual definition of Boo's real name, but I know it means, like, it's a very delicate thing. Mm-hmm. Even though, you know, that kid is not delicate at all. It was kind of sad, you know, that anytime we had the topic of having more kids, I was like, I just can't mentally.
Knowing your limits and what you could handle and being able to communicate that with your partner is huge.
Oh, yeah. There was a point several years ago, it was like, am I ready to have more kids? Like, do I want to have more kids? Like, it was seriously going through my mind if I wanted to have another one.
I think we had this conversation when you hit that stage.
I think so, yeah.
Because that was probably where you heard my opinion on the subject.
Yeah. It was like, probably a lot of it had to do with a lot of his, I think it was his sisters were pregnant. Mm-hmm. I think I was just getting those pheromones from that. I was like, no, I love babies. I love holding my nieces and my nephews when they're babies, playing with them and everything.
And then giving them back.
That is the greatest thing. It's almost like being a grandparent. I am looking forward.
Being the favorite aunt is one of my favorite things for my friends' kids.
I am the mean aunt because, a lot of this has to do with, with the way I grew up and what I went through growing up. I don't know if you listened to the episode of talking to our kids about our mental health. In there is when I was very young, I got injured. I screamed, and my mother was home, and she didn't come out to see what was wrong. I run into the house holding my knee together. She sees the blood, and she's like, oh, we got to go to the hospital. And then at some point later on, I asked her, why didn't you come out when I screamed? And her reason was she thought I was play screaming. You know how kids, that squeal, that gives me anxiety now as a parent and an adult.
Didn't respond to that.
Yes.
Yes.
I didn't realize this until I thought about it like a couple months ago and why I was triggered. I'm like, that's the reason why. And that's the reason why I don't want to have more kids. One of the reasons why, because that screaming, and that's not me having kids, is me being the mean aunt.
I just hate noise. I cannot handle the toddler shriek. Like, that is if I get sent to hell, that is going to be one of my punishments. Probably. Is being constantly having to listen to the toddler shriek. All right.
How often do people tell you that you should start having kids when y'all first got married?
Oh my God, constantly. And it's like the moment you have that ring on your finger, I say people, but it's mostly women.
Open sign. Ask me questions.
And, they start opining and some of them are asking, just out of innate curiosity because women like babies and they want everybody to have babies that they can go play with and then give back.
Yeah.
And there's also that, heavy expectation of that, you get married, therefore you have you should have kids. And because for older generations, that was what you did. And so there was a hefty degree of that coming from the older generations who just had that expectation that this is what you do as a woman. And I'm like, I'm in grad school or, I'm working on my career. I'm doing all of these things. And that basically continued at a constant pace until I think I was nearly 40 before that stopped.
Really?
Yeah, well, I look a lot younger than I am. But yeah, there was one conversation with a woman I used to work with. There was a group of people that were there, that we were having one of those, kids say the darndest things sort of conversations. And I don't remember exactly how it came up. But anyway, she was asking about whether we, when we were having kids and how many kids we wanted. I was like, we just want one. And I will never forget this. She looked at me and she said, well, that's selfish. And I kind of looked at her.
I've heard people called selfish because they only want.
I'm like, excuse me? And I don't remember what her argument. I was like, my husband and I are both only children. Because at that point, once we had all the financial stuff, I'm like, let's forget two. One is good. And I remember just being horrified. And eventually we reached a stage when people kept asking, and I was so annoyed because
that was part of the question.
It is none of anybody's business but your partner's when or if you are having children. This does not impact any of these other people. Like, even in your own family, like whether it is like spouses or not spouses, but parents or in-laws or whoever, that is none of their damn business.
Yeah.
And beyond that, you don't know. When you ask that question, whether the person that you are asking is somebody who is willingly choosing not to have children, whether they are struggling with infertility, and you're stepping all over that nerve.
Oh, yeah.
And I did learn eventually that the fastest way to shut them down was to talk about my miscarriage.
Yeah.
Because then they immediately look chastened and figure out like, oh, maybe I shouldn't ask that. Well, no, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Because it's not appropriate. It's not okay. And they are making your love life and your choices their business in a way that is just not a reality.
I am a total advocate for not asking any of those questions. When you're having kids, are you going to be a stay-at-home mom? Are you going to keep working? Because those are 3 conversations that is nobody's business.
Yep.
Unless they are actively involved in the process.
Yep.
I'm going to go to the lady doctor at some point to figure out if I have PCOS. Ryan and I done a lot of talking about getting our hormones checked, which will lead to changes in our diet and things like this. And that's something we are actively doing now before the new year. You know, I'm waiting until after Boo gets back into school.
Sure.
And that's also one of the things that I'm like, when do I take my daughter to the gynecologist?
So that's always a hot button.
What is the proper age? Is it because, you know, I don't want her to feel uncomfortable and stuff like this.
Like, I was raised, if you're not having sex, then there's no reason to go. And so I didn't start going until right before, like, when I got engaged, basically, so that there was time for all the birth control and stuff to build up in my system. And, of course, in our society, and especially because we live in the buckle of the Bible Belt, where there are religious overtones attached to all of that, you know, you can think your kid is not having sex. Statistically, they probably are.
Yeah.
And in that case, they need to be safe about it.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, it's a really hard call. And I think my personal notion on that particular front is find a female gynecologist so that they're more, you know, comfortable.
Exactly, yeah.
Because, like, I never wanted a male gynecologist. A, men tend to have bigger hands, and B, they don't have the experience to know what that feels like.
I never, well, there's an idea of why men go into gynecology and plastic surgery, things like that. My OB was a seasoned doctor. He was recommended to me by my sister-in-law, who by now had 2 kids, and he was not a doctor that a first-time mom needed to go to. He didn't ask me any questions other than, do you have any questions? I'm like, I don't know what questions to ask. I don't know what's going on with my body at this time. Like, now...
And on top of which, you were young.
Exactly. And now, with the internet and social media, kids have more access to that kind of information, whether some parents want it or not. But...
better to control the flow of information to make sure that they're getting good information.
Exactly that. And then one day, my OB, he was on call at the hospital, and I had to see a different doctor. He was relatively new, and he asked me questions, and he made me feel comfortable. And he's one that I have been seeing recently to get whenever I need to get my birth control replaced. But it was the doctor that you recommended to go see. She was the actual one that delivered my baby. And I had a blast. You know, she didn't make the birthing experience miserable, which I know that my original would have. Like, he threatened at one point, like, I was going through a contraction, and he's also an anesthesiologist. He was the one giving me my
Epidural.
And for some reason, I allowed my mother to stay in the room with me while I was going through all of that stuff. And going through a contraction as he was about to give me my epidural, and, you know, the pain sounds come out, and she goes, just breathe.
Yeah, that's going to be licensed to break someone's hand.
Yeah, but, you know, she was sitting down. She's still in college at this point, and, you know, she's sitting there doing her homework, which, anyways, and I was like, I am breathing. Like, I went full demon on her, I guess. And Ryan says this isn't what happened, but this is what happened in my head, that he threatened not to give me my epidural until I apologized to my mother. I was like, in my head, I was like, what? You can't do that.
Yeah, that is the height of unprofessionalism.
Yeah. I think I apologized to my mother because I did get my epidural. And I didn't know until after I had Boo that he was one of those doctors that was prone to snipping before delivering. Snipping that skin in between.
No.
Yeah.
That's a whole lot of no.
Yeah. I did, TMI, I did have to get stitches down there. There was a little tearing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The doctor that came in and delivered. Small hands, small fingers.
I love her. She's great.
Yes. I always hear people like, go see her, go see her. I was like, okay, well, I never have time. I have time now. Mm-hmm. I'm making the time.
And you should. I mean, that's the kind of thing where it's a self-care thing to take the time to go to a doctor who makes you feel comfortable and is actually going to listen to you.
Yes.
Because that's huge.
But I absolutely loved, the way she interacted with us, and she talked to us about things. And because of post-pregnancy brain, I completely forgot about her until, really thought about it. Mm-hmm. But I was going back to that second doctor. Mm-hmm. And, he was answering questions left and right, asking us questions. Now, this is the hard question and trigger warning for anybody listening. When did you find out that you could not have children?
Let's see. I think I was 32, 33. We had a year where it was like, okay, we have, moved into a house that has enough room for a child, and we were financially stable. It's like, okay, let's do the thing. I guess we went through that whole phase of like actively trying for nearly a year. Mm-hmm. And I did have one very brief pregnancy that didn't stick. And it was not, I was very fortunate that it was not like a super traumatic situation, because I know miscarriages can be incredibly traumatic. Mm-hmm. It frankly didn't last long enough. It was just long enough to be like, oh, this is a thing. And then the next week or two, it was not a thing. Mm-hmm. And of course, like 50% of pregnancies naturally self-abort. That's a common thing. Yeah. And I certainly wasn't worried about it. And I also had a thing at that point where I was relieved. And I'm like, oh, that's a thing I should probably think about. But we ended up, after that, I went in to be seen for probably my annual appointment and talked to my doctor about it. And they ran a bunch of hormone panels, and my progesterone was in the toilet. Mm-hmm. And so it was less that it's not that I can't get pregnant, it's that they just won't stay.
Yeah.
And so basically I would need to go on progesterone like immediately if I were to get pregnant. And what was basically happening was that I was not figuring out that I was fast enough to get to that point.
Yeah.
So that was one of those things that we had some conversations, and at that time I was working at the university. I had been working multiple jobs because I taught and did research as well. And I was writing on top of that, because writing was the thing that I had always wanted to do. There was a lot of pressure coming from certain areas that I was going to have to give up the writing when I had a baby. Which was patently false, because almost all of my writer friends have children and they make it work.
I was just thinking, I'm like, you may not have to spend as much time, but, when baby's sleeping.
But basically, it kind of was put to me certainly not by my spouse. It was almost put to me as, it's, you have to give up everything that you care about and everything that makes you when you have a baby, which, that is what my mother did for me. And she lost her entire identity to parenthood, which is a problem. And I remember I was furious. And I basically was like, if it comes down to writing or children, then I choose writing. And that was sort of this moment for me, because I was like, I don't know that I want children, or at least not a baby.
Yeah.
Because, as I said, I like sleep.
Babies are not for everyone. Ryan and I did have the conversation at some point, because our friends, they did the fostering program. Mm-hmm. They ended up adopting 2 of the kids that they fostered.
And they had a great experience.
They did. And I was like, if we adopt, I would want to adopt an older child. Mm-hmm. I love babies and everything. They're fun to hold. They're squishy. But it is not something I want to go through again. Potty training was the worst. Mm-hmm. I love the age where they're capable of physically telling me, Mommy, I'm hungry. Mommy, I need help. Mommy, something. I need to be told, what do you need?
That's fair. We basically had a conversation about the whole kid thing. And I'm like, I mean, like, this is what my doctor has said. I don't know that I want to continue to attempt to do this. And like, I love kids. I like older kids. I don't like tiny humans, at least not in large volumes. And like, that is not a diss on anybody who has tiny humans.
You have done very well with Boo.
Babies, I love to cuddle them and give them back because then I'm not losing my sleep. I just don't like toddlers. It's nothing personal. I can't handle the toddlers. They're just little ids running around with no control.
Yeah.
And the shriek. I can't with the shriek. But like, you know, once they hit about 8, it's like, okay, I can have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
And then they get interesting.
Yeah.
And so we had that whole conversation. My husband was not super hung up on having, you know, a child that was specifically our blood. And so we're like, okay, let's look into this whole adoption thing. And I was like, okay, well, if we're going to do adoption, I would really rather have an older kid so that we can bypass all that. And so that was kind of how we landed on what we were like, okay, this is good. And that was when we were starting to think about that. And then that was not exactly the route that we ended up taking, just because life turned out differently for us.
So, because of all that, did it change any major plans for the better or for the worse that you and your husband had?
Not really. It relieved a lot of stress on me. I had been putting this incredible pressure on myself that like, oh, I have to achieve this certain thing in my writing career, or I won't ever get a chance to do it again.
Yeah.
I had this sense of like an axe hanging over my head. And then as soon as we made that decision to not do that, I'm like, oh, I feel better. It's like I'm not, you know, I was no longer feeling like the thing that made me was being threatened.
Yeah, I totally understand that because I think my theory is when people start asking you, one, are you going to have kids? Another question I hate when people ask, are you going to have another one? Because the reasoning, because they need somebody to play with. They need somebody to learn to do all these things with. I'm like, that's what their cousins are for. That's what school friends are for. My theory is people want you to be as miserable as they are or were because they had so many kids.
Oh, you're not wrong. There is a certain subset of parents who, whether they made the choice and then regretted that choice, or it was an accidental thing and they found themselves stuck in a situation that was not what they wanted.
Yeah.
That get very, frankly, irate and ugly to people who choose not to have children. Like if they find out that you have infertility, you get a little bit of a pass because, you know, but if you because there was a part of me that actively chose, because like I could have done the whole like infertility treatment and all that junk, and I just didn't want to mess with that. That was not for me. But there have been some women who have been outright aggressive and angry as if my choice not to have children is somehow an indictment that they did choose, which is patently ridiculous because your life has nothing to do with mine.
Exactly.
And I think that there are women out there who resent women who made a different choice, who themselves maybe were not brave enough to make that choice.
Yeah.
And that sounds awful. And that's not how I mean it, because like I think the reality is that parenting is incredibly hard. And that is not something that is talked about often enough. And women, they have these, they go in and they have kids maybe too early, maybe not on purpose. And nobody talks about the fact that parenting is incredibly hard.
Oh, yeah.
And society has changed so much in the last several generations, because it used to be, you know, you had the village that raised because you had multi-generational families that are nearby, so you had help. And that's not the way things are anymore.
No.
And so these women are expected to do all of these things on their own, frequently with partners who are nominally there as a parent and a partner, but not really actually doing anything, because the wife is the default parent always.
Yeah.
And they're struggling. You know, they're on some level, they are resenting their children. And that's natural and normal. Like, this is a thing nobody talks about and nobody thinks is acceptable, because of course it sounds horrible to think, oh, I resent my child, but it's everybody thinks it. So let's just go ahead and get that out there.
Times I'll be like,
which is, it's not the same thing as saying, I wish I didn't have my child.
Yeah.
That's not what that is saying. And I think there's too many people who believe that if they acknowledge even to themselves, like, I resent that I have this burden and then there's no one to help me. They think that that's somehow unwishing their child from existence, and that's not what that is.
It's not the child that, they're really resenting. It's who was the other half of making said child who's not doing their due diligence in helping and raising that baby. And that was a very big conversation between Ryan and I when the topic of being parents came up, because my dad, amazing man. I love my father. It was the saddest day of my life when he passed. But he had very little that I remember, very little to do in my life. I do remember the things that he was there for. He would take us fishing, or he would take us to go visit family. There were things he was involved with.
But like the hands-on day-to-day, that's not what dads did.
No. I wanted to break that generational bridge. And when the topic of kids came up, I told Ryan, if you are working more often than you are spending time with our child, you need to find another job. And there was a point when he started at the steel mill. He was working the swing shifts. And I think I've had this conversation with you before, but I'm going to do it again.
Because we both have that experience of spouses working swing shift. Swing shift sucks.
Sucks so bad. And at this point, I don't think Boo was in school yet. Like, she was a year off. But, she was young enough that she didn't understand why Dad was sleeping in the bedroom and why she couldn't go ask him questions and interact with him. True, he had, we'll say 2.5 days that he could be with her. It's just like the weekend and stuff like this, but the swing shift was taking his time away from her. And I told him, I was feeling that strain mentally and physically. And I told him, you need to ask your higher-ups to give you a day hand position, or we need to start looking into getting you a different job. And I can't remember if he talked to them or the position opened up at some point after having that conversation that he took it. But it was definitely a godsend. Now he's been on that shift for the last 6 years. And we got to the point that we're struggling as being a couple and what we need to do as being parents. And we sat down and we had a long conversation. And all of that, changed how we were as a couple, as parents. And now he is way more involved. If I tell him, hey, Boo has this thing for school, if you could ask off or just leave in, come into work a little bit later. He's like, okay, I got you.
And being able to have those conversations with your spouse is essential.
Oh, definitely. That is, yes. Just being able to have a conversation with your spouse and not end up in an argument about, what they did wrong or what they didn't do or things like that. That is something that we, not in the year, in the last 9 months, we have been going through, and we call them check-ins. We have a list of questions we ask. It's one of those no judgment zones. Don't interrupt while somebody is answering the question.
And actually listen to what they're saying instead of preparing to respond.
Exactly. We have that with Boo, too. And we got all of this from that podcast, the To Be Better podcast. And I don't know if that's something that you and Alan want to listen to. You two have an amazing relationship. I guess it helps you don't see each other all the time.
Well, we've been together for 24 years. So, we've had some time to figure our stuff out.
You've had your ups and downs. Okay, so you found out you weren't able to have kids. How long have you known C?
I knew her, let's see, we're into, that would have been 2006. So however many years that's been.
Almost 20?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So long time.
Okay, so you gained guardianship over her. How did that change your dynamic?
So we ended up in a sort of unconventional guardianship situation with the child of a good friend of mine. She was not quite 14 at the time, and it was meant to be a temporary couple of year situation. Her mom needed to go do some other things in another state, and she was getting ready to start high school, and didn't want to leave. And we're like, "Hey, practice kid."
Yeah.
And she was, she didn't really know Alan, but she knew me.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of how that happened. And it was different. The two of them kind of had to figure out, they didn't know what to think about each other. So the first, 6 months were a little weird because, when you have a child from birth or even from tiny human status, you have some influence over who they become. And, we're inheriting a child who is fully formed, full personality, and we're like...
has her own character and everything.
Yeah, and so we spent a lot of time getting to know her for her, with zero... We went into this with zero expectations for what she's going to be like because we didn't know.
Yeah.
Because even, having known her under other circumstances, living with someone and getting to know them on that degree is very different.
Yeah.
So the first 6 months were a little awkward, and I will never forget that sort of the first real bonding moment between them. We love board games in our household, and we had gotten one called Killer Bunnies. And it is this crazy off-the-wall game with one of the most ridiculous sets of rules going along with it. But the two of them decided... I was having a party with some girlfriends of mine. It was around the holidays, and they were in the kitchen. They were like, "We're going to figure this game out." And they did, and they figured out. That was when they first kind of really started to bond. And so it ended up being a really great experience all around because, of course, we're getting thrust into parenthood in a very unusual sort of circumstance. But it was good because she's a great kid, and she likes to... She's not a teenager who doesn't talk to people. She loves to talk, which is fantastic because she was good at communicating. And we made it very clear from the beginning that, we know that this is a weird, awkward situation for everybody. And, you can tell us anything. Like if there is a thing that's happening that you're not comfortable with or that is, upsetting to you in some way, please tell us because we certainly don't know.
Yeah. If
you don't tell us, we're not going to get upset. And it's like, oh, okay. And so she took that, as gospel from the beginning.
She took and ran with it.
She did. And so we've always been able to have these very open conversations, which had the really marvelous side effect of improving mine and Alan's communication.
That's awesome.
Because, it's easy to get stuck in a rut with somebody that you've been with forever. Yeah. And you think it's like, we've been together for all these years. Yeah. There is nothing new that I can learn about you, which is patently untrue.
Yeah.
So just in learning to communicate with her, it improved our overall communication, which has been wonderful.
You got stuck in the roommate phase.
Yes.
You think you know everything by, we'll say, year 5 that you could possibly know about your significant other.
I'll give it for us year 10 because we were long distance for nearly 4 years.
Okay, yes.
Because living together is a real different thing.
You get the 7-year slump. Is that the year? 7 years?
I don't know if that's a thing. It sounds like a thing.
I think, I heard it several times at several different places. Like a married couple will get into the 7-year slump because they think they know everything. And by then, all they see is the bad.
I can certainly see that being a thing. And I particularly, I think if you have already had children at that phase, it's very easy to get stuck in your role as mom and dad and roommate and caretaker and all of these things. And you are no longer spouses.
Yeah.
That's no longer the center of anything. And this is an area that I've seen a lot among my friends and just observing with other people. You have to work to stay as married people and to stay in that headspace as opposed, because even inheriting a teenager, not having all of those years, leading up, we very much got stuck in that role of parent. And so most of our conversations for a long time were revolving around her and not, you have to actively, because, she grew up, she's 21 now, which I don't know how she was 13 yesterday. But she has moved out and is on her own. And when that happened, we had to refigure out how to be an us.
Yeah.
And so that took a lot of conversation that a lot of people are not having. And I think that's really the key in marriage, regardless, with or without children, is having those open channels of communication and being able to have the difficult discussions in those no judgment zones, saying like, hey, this is an issue for me. Can we work on this?
Yes, exactly that. Ryan asked me last night when we were having that conversation if we didn't have Boo as early as we did. He's like, well, we don't have a lot of things in common, which personally I love because then there's like really no competition, no judging. You and Alan have separate interests, but you also have a few things that you enjoy together. And I'm like, we do have a few things, Like, currently, right now, I'm not physically fit enough to go do a lot of the things that he enjoys doing, that he grew up doing.
He's such a super active dude.
He is, and I'm not as interested. Like, I want to be involved in that kind of thing. All right, so we talked about this part earlier about being financially stable. Nothing really changed for you after you had guardianship over C?
No, because it was a temporary guardianship situation, not a full adoption sort of deal. So she was still not fully our child.
Yeah.
So we didn't have the same degree of financial responsibility.
Okay.
Like, why would a woman who told me that I was selfish for not wanting to have more than one child, why would I want to have more children than I feel like I have enough financial or emotional capability of handling? That is irresponsible, in my opinion.
Exactly. It's like how... I never understood people like, oh, you're so selfish for not having more than one. I'm like, who am I being selfish towards? There are a lot of kids that grew up as only children. They turned out just fine.
Yep.
And they probably turned out better.
In some ways.
Yes.
There are pros and cons of both sides, but particularly if you do not feel that you are financially able to handle another kid, and during the span of time that all that was going on, we didn't. So I was like, no.
I saw how my parents struggled. My dad was always working. Very rarely would he actually get paid time off to do anything with us kids. If we were all interested in a whole bunch of other different things, it's like he couldn't take off time at work to go to everything, which I think is, it's great if your kids are all interested in different things, but it's inconsiderate that the person bringing in the income takes up all this time, because a lot of people only get so much paid time off. And if they can't continuously bring in that income, it's inconsiderate to say, hey, for the stay-at-home parent to be like, hey, you need to come do this, you need to do that. It's like, well, it's either I need to work or I need to do this.
Well, there's also this radical notion that not everything in the world has to revolve around your children. You are allowed to have a personality and a life beyond being a parent.
It is one of those struggles. There are a lot of times that I used Boo as an excuse not to go somewhere or not to do something.
As a fellow introvert, I fully respect this choice.
Being known as, oh, you're Boo's mom. It's like, I have a name. I was prone to this as a kid. People would be like, oh, this is my mom. And, I wouldn't get their name. So they just ended up becoming mom. For example, my first friend when I moved down here, who eventually has become my best friend, her mom has always been and always will be Mama, because she's been like a mother to me since I've known her. And that's how I treat her, I treat her like a mama, but I also treat her as an individual from the position of mom to my best friend. And I think a lot of people forget to do that with parents. Like, I honestly don't feel like a lot of children's parents stick together long enough to become friends. Like, Boo's current best friend, she is not the child's with Mom, she is her name.
Mm-hmm.
That is what her name is in my phone. That's how we talk to each other. I'm not just booze mom to her either.
Yeah.
Parents need to stick together more.
That was actually one of the things that we were surprised about, since we inherited a teenager.
Yeah.
Because we occupy this sort of weird space because we hit that age where all of our friends were having kids and we weren't.
Yeah.
And then the one that we acquired ended up being a little older than most of our friends' kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we thought we were going to suddenly, because we're children of the 80s. When we grew up, like my mom knew all of my friends' parents.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was, because social media was not a thing, cell phones were not a thing. Mm-hmm. This was how we functioned. And so I remember we had a birthday party for her shortly after she moved in. And so she invited a bunch of her friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I was shocked and frankly appalled at the way that all of these parents behaved, because no one stopped to meet us, to introduce themselves, to say,
what?
Hey, I'm so-and-so's mom, nice to meet you, or whatever. One mom actually did what I expected of a mom, to be like, oh, I'm about to leave my kid. Now, granted, these are 14-year-old kids, but I'm about to leave my kid.
So they just
at the home of a complete stranger. Yeah.
That is so rude.
And I'm like, and there was one mom actually that came in who was speaking to all of the children because she clearly knew all of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm standing right there. And she did not acknowledge me. And I finally just stuck my hand in her face. And I'm like, hi, I'm Kait. Because you're standing in my house and not even acknowledging my existence. Rude. But yeah, we didn't get to know any of the parents of her friends, because all of the communicating happened between her and her friends, and they made their arrangements. It's I need to be at this place at this time. And we're like, okay.
See, that never really makes a whole lot of sense to me, where parents, they're like, oh, we're just going to drop our kids off at this event and then run errands. Yeah, I understand it's practical, but I'm all for, I'll go introduce myself if it's somebody new.
Mm-hmm.
If I just absolutely have to do something that's going on through the event, I'll be like, okay, is it okay if I just leave? I will be back before this thing ends to pick her up. But most of the time, I'll just stay.
Mm-hmm.
And because if, this is the first time you've ever thrown a birthday party for a 14-year-old, it's I don't know what I'm doing. And it's I would have been like, do you need help with anything? Do you need help, getting the food set out, things like this? I always arrive early.
Mm-hmm.
It was never taught to me to do that by my parents. It just became instinct because I didn't want to be late. I wanted to be able to do something. I'm here. I'm just sitting around doing nothing. I could go ask if I need to help. Booze, friends, parents, they'll stay. I think her actual last birthday party, one parent left, just dropped her kid off and left and had to do something. I think she had to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I was completely fine with that. She let me know what was happening. They had family down the road that could come get her when it was over. I'm like, okay, that's fine.
And it makes a difference if you, but these people didn't know us.
Yeah.
And that was the part where I was like, really? Okay. And then I remember asking her about it. Is this normal? She's like, yeah, none of. And there were a few times when at the very beginning, because we had to figure out sort of where the line was in terms of permissiveness and that kind of thing. Because it's certainly we want you to hang out with your friends, but also we are responsible for you and we need to know where you are. And so that became a thing. It's yeah, you're going to keep the Life 360 on so we know where you are, because until you can tell me the address and the name of the people's house that you're going to be at, because, my true crime podcast listening self is imagining all sorts of horrors if I can get in touch with you.
That reason to true crime. Because I will get so freaking paranoid. No, I have to get her a phone. Now I have to get her a smartwatch and I can track her.
And I think it's so funny because we watched, she was, I guess, a freshman when Stranger Things came out. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is early 80s. So this is when I grew up.
Yeah.
And so we watched it together, and she was sort of fascinated because she was like, they're going off on their bikes by themselves and not telling anybody where they're going. I'm like, yes, this is the 80s, honey. We were free range children.
Even in the 80s it was like that. I could go if for some reason I was at a friend's house that lived down the road from the local city park. I could, like, if I was just visiting them and I'd have my bike there, I'd take my bike, I'd just ride down the street to the park. And then we moved to a different town, and I could just ride in town on my bike all alone, go to the store, get some candy, ride back home. Nowadays, we are so worried about our kids' safety that we become neurotic about it. And I think it is because of social media, and people are more aware of, you know, the other bad people out there.
Like, statistically, if you actually look at crime statistics, it's better than it was in the 80s in reality. But we are far more aware of what's actually happening in the world. Yeah. And I think there's a happy medium, because I grew up in the 80s, free-range children. I was the tail end of Gen X, and we were trained to be independent.
Yeah.
And so, like, we were independent thinkers. We took care of our own stuff. And, you know, we were like the latchkey kid generation. Like,
I was just about to ask if you were a latchkey kid, because I was.
I was not, for the most part. My mom actually left work when I started school.
Yeah.
And was a stay-at-home mom until I was about 15. So I was not really a latchkey kid. There were, like, occasions when we had a miscommunication and I, like, rode the bus home when I wasn't supposed to. And then was, like, home by myself. Like, okay. But, you know, that fostered, for better or worse, that fostered a sense of independence that I think that newer generations do not have. And so they're missing a pivotal piece of training for, like, okay, this is how you problem solve and figure out your stuff on your own.
Yes.
And that, you know, I heard I can't remember where this was. Was it Colorado maybe? I don't know. They had to basically pass a law to allow parents to give their kids some freedom and independence so that they can, you know, learn to be functional adults. Yeah. Without being turned into CPS for irresponsible parenting.
Yeah.
Like,
there's that difference between, you know, leaving your kids because you don't want to take care of them, but then there's the kids that, you know, they understand how to do this. They understand how to call for help or go somewhere safe. But I was one of those kids. I could be left alone. When I was very young, my mom did work for brief periods of time when I was growing up. When I was in kindergarten, she worked for the company my grandfather worked for in crafting doors. And she worked as the secretary there. And where we lived, my great-grandmother, my great-aunt, well, not my great-aunt, her daughter, well, some kind of aunt lived there too. For the weirdest reason, we were not allowed in our house if my mom wasn't home. That is still one of the things that has boggled my mind. Why would a 6-year-old want to watch after-school cartoons? But we had to do all that stuff at my grandmother's house, who just lived across the yard, because we were renting a house that was on her property growing up. And I remember one specific time, my mom's car wasn't home. Like, it was in our driveway, and this woman is prone to napping at weird times. And her car was there. I was like, oh, Mom's home. I'll have my after-school cartoons playing and watching them at a low volume. My great-grandmother, she comes storming into my house, grabs me by the arm, and pulls me out, and then whoops my hide. I'm screaming, what did I do? She's like, you know you're not allowed to be in your house when your mom's not home. I'm like, her car's over there. Well, she had to leave her car.
Because you knew that at 6.
I was like, I thought she was taking a nap. Okay, I'm just going to read the question. If there had been a miracle baby, would you have continued working outside the home to be a stay-at-home mom and continue writing?
There was no part of me at any point in my life that wanted to be a stay-at-home mom.
Okay.
That sounds like my own personal hell. To be surrounded by tiny humans and no adult feedback and interaction.
Oh, yeah.
And I would have embraced the daycare and whatnot. And I don't know that I would have been able to be a full-time writer before my kid was grown had that circumstance happened.
Yeah.
Like, had it happened, we would have done whatever needed to be. But no, I never wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I have so much incredible respect for the women who can do that, because it is the hardest, least acknowledged job in the world.
It is. And, because of social media, you hear now about how husbands are like, well, what have you been doing all day? I've been working this 9-to-5 physically active job.
Yeah, that would be a good way to get murdered in your sleep.
Mm-hmm. Because and I always there were several women when I was pregnant, and after Boo was born, they'd be like, oh, so what do you do for work? I'm like, I don't work. I'm a stay-at-home mom. And they would look at me like, you don't work outside the house? No, that's not what I felt called to do.
It's very frustrating, kind of the state of women in our country, well, on multiple fronts, but because there's no happy medium. Everything has been artificially dichotomized, and there's always some group that feels threatened by the choices of another group. Mm-hmm. Whether it's the people who it's like, oh, we're the second wave feminists, we fought for your right to work outside the home and do all of these things, so you choosing to stay at home with your child is somehow a flagrant denial of that. And like, no, that doesn't have anything to do with you. And I think
feminists nowadays, they have become so radical, and Ryan keeps saying stuff about it, how a lot of stuff that these feminists are fighting for, and it's like, that was not the purpose of the feminism movement.
I think there's a lot of, because I would consider myself a pretty radical feminist in terms of the grand scheme of things, but I think at the heart of it, it's about giving women the freedom and the right to choose their own path, whatever that may be, whether that is a more traditional role or whether that is not having children and having a full-time career and maybe getting married, maybe not. There are some women that are making those choices. And actually, if you look at psychological studies, the people who are happiest are unmarried women who never had children and never married because they're not having to please anyone but themselves.
Yeah. I can totally see that. But because of my age bracket, I don't really know a lot of single women. Mm-hmm. And being married for almost 15 years now. Mm-hmm. And, your personal preference, if you want to stay single and go for the career, if you find the career that just gives you fulfillment, because what you could be doing could help somebody else in the future. And that's what I want for all women. And I think, the purpose behind the feminist movement was women standing for women.
It's like, hey, let's topple the patriarchy, which is never going to happen in our lifetime.
It's never going to happen. And, if you can't topple it, fix it in a healthy way.
That's going to require massive therapy for every single person on the planet.
Yeah. I've come across this several times, this TikTok video. This woman, she's like, if I win the lottery, you're getting therapy. You're getting therapy. You're getting double therapy.
I mean, it's a thing. Therapy is wonderful. Everybody should have some, even if you don't think you need it.
And you don't even, if you just don't feel comfortable going to somebody, there are plenty of apps out there now where you can video chat with somebody. You don't have to physically leave your home if you're not comfortable doing that, and talk to somebody that way. Anyways, moving on. What are your thoughts about parents that let their kids run amok in a restaurant?
Don't. It's rude. I get that parents want their opportunity to go out and that they're stressed and they may not, have an opportunity to do so without their children. Then don't go to a sit-down restaurant where everybody else is going to have a nice meal and do not want to listen to your kid or your kid's device at top volume. I did not go to the restaurant to listen to Teletubbies or whatever the terrifying children's programming is. Like, no, I know that I can say that because not a parent of a tiny human. You have headphones. That was the way you did it, and it was great.
Yes. It kept her from hearing a lot of the conversation she wasn't supposed to be listening to. But I don't know if you heard this. It was sometime last year. There is this restaurant that charged a parent tax. That if they let their kids run around in their restaurant, this was a nice sit-down restaurant, if they let them run around, cause chaos for anybody else, they were charged, I don't know how much if it was a set price or the amount of kids or...
The amount of chaos.
The amount of chaos.
I mean, and, sometimes it's not that they're running around, although that's the worst of the worst.
Oh.
But, I remember I was out having lunch with a friend, catching up. It'd been quite a while since I'd seen her, and we were sitting in a booth, and this family came, and they had children who were frankly old enough to know better.
Yeah.
Who were not being monitored. I don't know where the parent went, but the kids were restless and shaking the booth. So she was whipping back and forth like she was in some kind of a roller coaster while she's trying to eat, and of course getting very annoyed because we're just trying to have a conversation and a meal. Yeah. And here is this kid who looked probably 9 or 10.
Yeah, definitely knew better.
If you're 2, okay, don't be leaving your 2-year-old unattended. We really wanted to say something. And so we ended up cutting our meal short because it was a miserable experience for all of us, and that's not reasonable.
There's also the people that go to restaurants that are obnoxiously loud. And if it's especially known to be a family-friendly restaurant, like our favorite Mexican restaurant we like to go to, there have been times